Welcome and thank you for joining us today. I am Parna, host of Beyond 1 Million Fireside Chat, strategies to grow your company irrespective of the industry you are in. In these segments, I have the privilege of speaking with entrepreneurs and experts on what it takes to scale and transform a business, as well as challenges to grow a company to 5 million and beyond. My guest today is Manu Matthew, a serial entrepreneur who has built and scaled several companies and also has had some super successful exits. Welcome, Manu. It's so nice to have you here.
Hey, Parna. Great to meet you.
Why don't you tell us a little about yourself, your journey, and the industry that you're in?
Well, I was born and brought up in Southern Africa in a country called Zambia. Grew up in a neighboring country called Botswana and came to the US in 1988 and went to school upstate New York in Rochester, New York, studied mechanical engineering, and through a series of turns and a big turn in Albuquerque, as Bugs Bunny would say, I ended up in the field of marketing and marketing analytics. So that's where I've been for the last probably 2 decades.
Excellent. So tell us about some of the companies that you worked at and founded.
Yeah, so let's see, when I graduated, it was actually during the height of certainly one recession, and ended up at an incubator based here in Massachusetts, in Cambridge, actually. So was in the business of helping brands get up to speed, what was called, at that time called client server technology. The internet was just starting to come to be. Netscape, if you remember, Netscape was a thing. And so this incubator kind of, lit in me this bug for how startups work, because I was surrounded by, I think at that juncture, probably 7 to 8 different incubators, all doing something different with data or front-end development or something. So it was pretty amazing. I mean, given that I just graduated and had found myself in this position. So the different companies I ended up working with, the first one was a company called Visium, which is a database marketing company that I actually went as a hire, but I ended up running operations and sales there. And the second one I did was my own startup called Visual IQ. And after Visual IQ, I ended up advising a company called AdLib that was based in the UK, and helped them bring their service and products here to the US. We grew that for about a year and a half and ended up exiting to Smartly, which is in the creative optimization space. And I ended up doing another startup called Cohora, which is my own, focused in helping brands with customer retention and growth.
Phenomenal. I love hearing these entrepreneurial stories, especially the immigrants. And we have so many of amazing founders who've come from different countries, and look at where you are and look at where so many of the other founders are. And needless to say, some of the largest companies right now are run by CEOs from different countries.
Absolutely, yeah. No, it's great. I think maybe it has to do with the upbringing, but I certainly didn't think I'd net out in the startup world. I think the fact that my first real gig out of college was being part of an incubator, and just, every day it's a different type of energy. You're seeing different type of leaders, sales, selling. I mean, I was in my early 20s, and I was people were teaching how to sell, and so those are really, you approach it with a weird kind of confidence. So it was a good part of my career.
Well, I guess no matter which industry you are in or what role you play, you are constantly selling.
That's 100% sure. That's actually, that's the one piece of advice I gave both my kids. They're both in college, and I said, look, whatever you do before you graduate, take one class in sales. You have to do it. So no matter what you're studying, just take that class. You'll enjoy it, and it'll bring out a different dimension in how you think about everything around you.
Yeah, totally agree. What your thoughts are and how to be a good salesperson.
Ooh, It's funny. It's funny because I think that as an entrepreneur, you definitely get to understand yourself a lot better, perhaps at the beginning of the journey than where you ended up netting out. But in other words, you end up wearing a lot of hats, right? Whether you like it or not. And so it helped you very quickly figure out what you're good at doing and not good at doing, and what you have to do out of necessity. And I think with my own startup, Visual IQ, I had to wear the sales hat, really. And I'm very much a relationship salesperson. And the problem sometimes with relationship selling is it takes forever. It takes forever to close a deal. And I since then I've learned from some amazing chief revenue officers that were part of my team who just taught me different techniques and tactics, and the art of being direct but not really aggressive. So I was very much a relationship selling guy, and I wore the sales hat up until we did our Series A round. And for better or for worse, Visual IQ at that time did not sell into SMB. We picked the enterprise lane because
That's long sales cycle.
yeah, so it was brutal. And on top of that, I remember taking this I had this trip to New York. I went there 5 times. I got blown off 5 times. And it taught me, hey, you'll always need a backup plan. So when you go to New York, you got to have 10 meetings lined up because everyone's going to blow you off every now and then. But, it's fun. It's a really intoxicating type of way to get a win, not only for yourself, but, because you're constantly kind of stretching the boundaries of what you're comfortable in doing. But then when you get it to work and click, it's a euphoric feeling for not only yourself, but the team. And then you also kind of figure out as a founder that you don't always have to be the only person chopping down the tree. Like you can have, who are your partners that you can bring on board to help sell? And so we got lucky in that we found some great partners early in our journey that brought on some pretty phenomenal brands. Without them, I don't know if we would ever, I got a meeting with AT&T, with Verizon, with Vanguard, and those ended up being our first customers. And those that were probably, one was a 7-figure deal, and the other 2 were 6-figure deals. So you kind of need, in the world of entrepreneurship, when you're especially in selling, it helps to have friends that can help you sell.
For sure. Yeah, I think the partnerships is really important. And I know that as I sit on boards of startups or mentor startups, everybody wants to go in for like VC funding, like even before they have a proof of concept or just barely. And to your point, it's, why would you want to dilute your company so early for like 100K or something versus, like you said, bringing in the right partners who can help get you in the door, start testing the products. I think that's really great advice.
Yeah. Well, what I've also learned about startups, I mean, if you look at sort of the DNA of startups, for example, on the West Coast, there's a lot of companies with some amazing ideas where there's somebody unique on either on the startup side or on the VC side that is sort of able to see 10, 20 steps ahead. And therefore, raising a ton of cash at the beginning makes sense because you're sitting on a big, big idea. So I've learned that you have to sometimes respect the founders a little bit, in the sense that they probably see things that you're not quite seeing because they have a vision for what they want to build out, and they're amazing at articulating it. So raising 100 million on an idea, actually might make sense because it could be the next unicorn. I mean, but for us, we people, I could only see one step ahead, and so we went the traditional route and had some revenue first, some customers, some referenceability, and then raised capital.
Yeah. No, and it's not a one size fits all at all for any startup, right?
Exactly.
It's very unique to the industry, the product, the service that you're selling for sure.
Yeah.
So when you started Visual IQ, that was your first foray into entrepreneurship, right? For yourself?
For myself, yeah.
Yeah. So what were some of the challenges that you faced as a first-time entrepreneur? Obviously, you're very good at what you do. You know the industry, the market, but as an entrepreneur, how hard was it, or was it hard at all?
Oh, goodness. It was hard because I think ignorance was bliss at that time because I didn't know what the hell I was getting into. But I think there were lots of challenges. I mean, you name it, we probably had them. Product, clients, team, time to market, like all these things, you kind of learn as you go along. And I think that you also realize, I meant this earlier, where if you're the one, everyone depends on you, right? In a business, if you're a founder, sort of to lay down the vision and to execute against the vision. But you also have to kind of listen to the market a little bit and pay attention to the market. Like you can't be so hell bent on going in one direction. So for example, our first product was an automation product. And we got lucky in the sense the idea for Visual IQ came as a result from the previous startup I was in that was acquired by an agency called Cara. And at the agency, I was there for 3 years or so. And at the agency, this idea for Visual IQ came about because I heard it from a customer, right? So a customer was trying to figure out how to measure their media because media dollars are going in and out from all different places. So one consolidated sort of place to measure cost of acquisition. So we built the platform and we went to market with that platform. And that's how we launched Visual IQ. We had one or two customers, but then I realized very quickly that people weren't buying it. Like they weren't willing to pay for automation, which is either that or I was a really bad sales guy. But nonetheless, one customer that we had was Wachovia Bank at that time. I think Wachovia was bought by, I can't remember who bought them, but there was the head of marketing there. I said, hey, listen, we're putting all this money into market. Can you guys help us figure out if these 5 publishers got media spend from us, how do I allocate which one of those guys had the biggest impact on my brand and the acquisition? And that's how this topic that Visual IQ ended up solving for, called attribution, media attribution, came about. And so I list this as sort of a challenge because at that point it was a weird aha moment in our own journey where we were like, hey, wait a second, this other stuff that we were trying to go to market with isn't quite working. But this attribution thing seems to be catching wind and it's going to become a massive problem. And so we went all chips in on this topic of attribution, and we became one of 3 vendors that ended up pioneering that whole field of media attribution and how to go about building it with analytics and in-depth machine learning and all this good stuff. So, but along the way, you had to sell the vision of attribution because now you had to go and educate the market, right? You had to, but thankfully for us, we weren't doing it by ourselves. There was these 2 other players that were well-funded. And so the more education they did, it benefited us as sort of a downstream vendor, a provider of the solution. So, learning how to sell effectively, learning how to sell against competition, especially competition that was really well-funded, were some of the earliest challenges that we had. And, frankly, it ended up being a big blessing in disguise because you fast forward, 6-7 years, we had 275 brands worldwide. We had 300 something employees. So we ended up doing something right. It was great. But the other challenge sort of that we faced along the way, especially in the early days, was, when you bring on accounts like AT&T and Vanguard, and Verizon, the last thing you want to do is lose them. And so how do you build an effective team if you don't have cash in the bank? Because that's the other thing, nobody pays you on time. And so all these interesting business dynamics definitely hit you in the first year. Everything you want to do takes twice as long, is 3 times as expensive. All those cliches actually end up being true, weirdly, but you kind of take one step at a time and figure out how you go about solving. And you do some smart things around things that you can control, like how to invoice, how to pay up front, how to collect up front, how to negotiate terms up front, all these things that kind of help you slowly but progressively make a dent in these problems. You have to kind of approach that. And so that's where I think having a good team around you, having a good set of advisors around you makes a ton of difference.
No, that's really great. 2 things that also stands out to me as you were talking. One was your willingness to pivot, because oftentimes startups are afraid to pivot. It's like, this is the market, this is where we are going, this is our product market fit. But very quickly you realize that you have to pivot, and that willingness to be flexible, I think, is a really important attribute of a founder. Just because you thought so doesn't, it's okay to pivot, and pivot doesn't always mean failure.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, you have to, be willing to adapt, kind of listen to what the market is telling you, look at what competition is telling you, and be willing to fail and fail fast and adapt.
Yeah, for sure. And you also did something very smart. Obviously, you did a lot of things smart, but you're talking about how do you leverage the competition versus just kind of putting them out there as competition because I suspect they were helping you build that category. And you
Mhm.
didn't have, you were kind of piggybacking on them using the time and the money and resources to do the education, creating the category, and you could just come in, obviously leverage it and making sure that you had the right product, obviously, to be able to tackle that.
Yeah, it's we go. I mean, I think there's with a lot of things, sometimes a little bit of luck and timing is
Mm.
part of that recipe.
Right.
Because the most fascinating thing about attribution in this example was it was brand new, right? So I could have gone to any VC in the US, and the first thing I was told actually was, yeah, the space is nascent. Who are your competitors? How much spending is going to this? So you walked out of doors pretty quickly, and because there's no market, right? So a little bit of patience, I think, helped us, and the fact that those not only were these competitors kind of helping to educate, there was this underlying sort of business problem that the agencies were facing that wasn't verbalized, so because they were being pressured by brands to answer the same question that Wachovia asked us. And
Mhm.
so the moment word got around, hey, Visual IQ is solving this or solving that, we got lucky in that those partners that brought in AT&T and Verizon and Vanguard had heard about this, through the grapevine, hey, Visual IQ is doing X and Y. So that's where the luck component comes in. And then when you walk into a VC with, five major brands that are doing this, then suddenly you have a very different conversation, which is exactly what happened with us.
Right. That's awesome. So going back now a few years, when you were scaling your company, what were some of the challenges that you might have faced to grow it from 1 to 5 million, and how did you overcome those?
So we talked about a couple of these things. So for example, the challenge that we face was sort of self-inflicted, partially because we probably didn't know better. First was we decided to go after enterprise and not SMB. And marketing tactics and spending is very different in those two categories, as you know, and you just mentioned that sales cycles are quite long. So in that one, to make that work for you, for example, you just need partners who can bring in leads, because it becomes a volume game, right? So you need more conversations because out of 10 conversations, three will move forward and the other seven will move into the next quarter and the quarter after that and so on. So every month you need to be having some pretty meaningful conversations. So the more doors you open, the better. The other probably major problem, not the challenge, one of the biggest challenges we had was cash. Like cash is king. I ended up like literally printing it out in bold and sticking it on my door in my office. Cash is king. Like you have to be very, very prudent with your spending because it impacts when you can hire, it impacts who you can hire, it impacts investments, the whole nine yards. So we pre-funding, we just changed the way in which we collected. Like if AT&T is willing to write a seven-figure deal, how do I structure the deal so that I get all of it up front, or I get half up front and the rest in delivery or whatever it is. So we just started experimenting with different payment terms, and some of them worked, and actually a whole bunch of them worked. And that's where I think a little bit of luck comes into play. But the other thing was competition. Yeah, when you scale, to get to 1 million it's in itself a weird kind of sort of dynamic, because getting that first customer is always painful, and then you end up selling like a bunch of 10 grand a month projects, and before you know it, you're at 1 million, and then you're like, okay, well, how do I get to 5, and how do I get to 10, how do I get to 15 and 20? And every one of those steps I found had an interesting sort of challenge tied to it. The $10 million company had a very different set of challenges compared to the $20 million company. So, but through all that, competition is one of those things you really have to pay attention to, because, if you go into an account and you know that competitor A is selling in there, What are they selling? How are they selling it? Because they could impact, if your price tag was 500,000 and they're willing to do it for 100,000, then you have to sell a little differently. So, excuse me. So those are things that some of the challenges that we had to get to about 5 million, which is just paying close attention to getting there.
Really good points there. So there's obviously, hundreds of entrepreneurs right now starting different companies. They have amazing concepts. But the current market, the landscape has shifted so drastically even over the last few years, right? What do you think founders should be looking at as they navigate a very different market, which is what it is today? Irrespective of the industry and or maybe even in the Martech field, whichever industry.
I think that some fundamental things in the startup world don't necessarily change. So I think stay focused on your vision and your goal, what you're aspiring to do, but at the same time, be very keenly aware of what the market is telling you. If the market's telling you one thing, because one of the things you kind of alluded to is there was a time when getting a product out the door would take you about a year. Now people are getting products out the door in like weeks, if not, it's kind of nuts, but amazing. So be aware of the market and just be true. Try to evaluate it objectively, meaning don't go down a path where you're purely driven by emotion because you want to try and solve it. If the market's telling you there's no market, then maybe there's something in what the market is telling you that's a slightly different product or tangent, or then sort of forcing you to consider adapting something different. The other thing is, if you're putting in your own cash or you're raising capital, be financially prudent because cash is king. The moment if you burn through the cash, it's hard to. Don't put yourself between a rock and a hard place, I guess. So make sure you're paying attention to those things. The other thing is, build a solid team, invest in your team, because these folks that you hire, the first 10 folks that you hire are, probably your most important hires. They should treat them as the most valuable asset that you have, because they're the ones who are going to help you get out of probably the biggest jams when it comes to supporting a customer or getting a product out the door. And that pays dividends really for a long time. I mean, one of the things I prided myself and the management team prided themselves at BIQ was people who had been with us for a long time, and there's a ton of great loyalty and a ton of great relationships that we ended up building as a result of it. And it's probably the proudest thing. I mean, besides everything else, it's probably one of the prouder aspects of Visual IQ that I have. And then so I mean, I'd say those are sort of the three things. But beyond that, I think there's this notion of, always listen to your customer. And by listen, it's almost like it's like a therapist, right? You hear a whole bunch of words coming out of somebody's mouth, but what are you reading between the lines? Is really the secret to that. So if you're not a good product guy, then bring a good product guy to the meeting, because a good product guy can listen to a whole bunch of garbage coming out, and they can say, hey, but they said this, and this, and they can piece together an actual solution that you didn't even see, right? So that's just where recognizing your strengths and weaknesses comes into play. But that's the key part. Your customers are the ones who will tell you whether you're sitting on something that they're willing to pay for, and so that's a critical piece of that equation.
Wow, those are awesome insights. Thank you. So before we wrap up, despite all the insights you gave us, what is the one advice that you would give to an entrepreneur who is looking to grow their company from 1 to 5 million?
Well, besides the stuff we just covered, which is adapting the financial side, the team, and certainly the customer side, I would say that, in my case, I was lucky in that we obviously had good customers, but the team my team that we ended up building out, which was the CFO, the CRO, and the chief product guy, were my partners in everything, right? And because I recognized those are my weaknesses. I could go to market, I could talk to customers, but they provided really a lot of visibility and creativity around how to, obviously, on the selling side, the CRO had a lot of great ideas, creativity to get the market product out, positioning, pricing. The CFO helped me think about how to raise money, how to think about valuations, how to think about terms, all these good things. So the point is that you can't, it sometimes takes a village to succeed. In this case, it helped, having these guys be in my corner, kind of thinking through these problems and solutions was such a critical piece of our success. And then obviously the broader teams were critical to that as well. So I'm always grateful to what they ended up doing for us back then.
Those are amazing tips. And you're absolutely right. The founder cannot do it all.
Yeah.
And it's really important, as you just said, to understand where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are and where you need to augment.
Absolutely.
So I think that's a really great tip. So Manu, thank you so much. Amazing tips. I'm sure our audience is going to absolutely find these, they're going to love it. And I'm sure they'll find these insights super helpful as they build and grow their respective companies. So thank you again for being here. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Parna. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I truly enjoyed the conversation.
Great. Thank you. And good luck with your latest venture.